Let me take you on a trip back to the origin of the modern superhero movie. In 2002, there were no big interconnected universes, no after credit scenes, and the genre was widely regarded as a joke by the public. Let's look back at the movie that rebooted the genre. Let's look back at a fan's honest review of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Now before we get started, and before anyone in the comments starts typing out that I'm a Raimi fanboy and I need to take off my nostalgia goggles, I feel I should let you know that I didn't even see the Raimi trilogy until spring of 2019. Now, that being said, I love this movie. I love the characters, I love the themes, and I love the goofy comic book style gimmicks.
We'll meet again, Spider-Man!
There are three major themes in this movie: abuse, love, and responsibility. So let's hop right into the movie. Abuse and power. Harry and Norman Osborn.
It wasn't for me.
Of course it was. Don't ever be ashamed of who you
I'm
are.
not ashamed of who I am.
Just what happened.
This scene perfectly sets the stage for the theme of abuse and power. Norman shows his resentment and anger towards Harry because he isn't as smart or as intelligent as himself. Then, Harry introduces his father with his full name. It's a small thing, but it shows that they have a more formal relationship than your average father and son. Norman is also much happier talking to Peter, a smart kid with great potential, than he is talking to his own son. Later, we see Norman at his work, and after one of his scientists, Dr. Strom, suggests that Norman's latest project was a failure, General Slocum threatens to pull Oscorp's funding. Through his facial expression and his tone, Norman shows that he cannot stand when someone challenges his power like both Dr. Strom and the General did, which we'll get back to later. Then, after Harry graduates, what does Norman do? Does he congratulate his son for his hard work? No, he gives him a backhanded compliment, pushes him out of the conversation, and then he congratulates Peter on his hard work and on getting the science award, even going so far as to tell Peter that he's family to him. He even offers to get Peter a job in a later scene. He's offering a huge helping hand to a kid he's only met twice while he can't even compliment his own son. And in a later scene, Norman learns that Peter needs a job. Look at how happy he is to have the opportunity to help out Peter. And when Peter declines, saying he wants to earn what he gets, Norman says,
I respect that.
and we can see the sadness and anger in Harry's face. We even learn that Norman inspects Harry's apartment weekly, showing that he doesn't trust Harry at all.
Stormin' Norman's making his weekly inspection.
All this combines to make Harry feel worthless in comparison to Peter. He doesn't even want Norman to meet Mary Jane, the woman he's dating, because he's worried Norman will look down on him for dating someone who isn't successful, someone who's waiting tables for minimum wage. Despite him being in love with Mary Jane, the emotional abuse he receives from Norman on a daily basis holds him back from being a good boyfriend, from having his own life. And Harry can't win because when he refuses to let Norman meet Mary Jane, he gets angry with him for not doing so. Now, after the Goblin murdered everyone Norman's way, his life was going great. His company is very successful, but just when everything seems fine, and it seems like the Goblin won't have to come out again, everything is ripped away from Norman. The Oscorp board members fire him. Just as with General Slocum and Dr. Strom, Norman gets outraged, yelling and screaming at the board members and then begging them to let him keep his job. After they refuse, the Goblin comes out. At the World Unity Day festival, the Goblin murders the board members, the last people standing in Norman's way. But then, he's presented with one more foe, Spider-Man, the only person who's as powerful as the Goblin. Before the Goblin attacked the World Unity Day festival, we see Harry struggling to live with the scars of his abuse. He wants to be in a loving relationship with Mary Jane, but he keeps thinking about what his father will think of her. He tells her that she should have worn the black dress instead of the one she chose, because Norman prefers black. She tries to tell him that Harry shouldn't focus on what Norman would think, but rather what he thinks, but he won't listen. And after the Goblin attacks, and MJ is almost killed, Harry wants to buy her something to help her feel better. He just can't see how she feels. Then, we see the Goblin formally introduce himself to Norman, claiming that all he wants to do is give Norman power. This is exactly what we've seen happen. The Goblin isn't murdering random people for no reason. Look at the people he's killed. Dr. Strom was killed because he claimed Norman's experiment was a failure. General Slocum was killed because he threatened to pull Norman's funding. Quest Aerospace was bombed because their Oscorp's rival, and the board members were killed because they fired Norman. The Goblin is only killing people in Norman's way, and based on the expression on Norman's face, we can see that he is appalled by the Goblin's actions, but he doesn't stop him, because the Goblin's giving him everything he wants. So the Goblin sets out to do what he said he was going to do, remove that final roadblock in Norman's life, Spider-Man. After he captures Spider-Man, he tells them that the only purpose for the regular people of New York is to give the exceptional people power, which is exactly what Norman wants. This line, along with the build-up in the earlier scenes, is perfect at showing that the Goblin is not a brand new entity, but rather an extension of Norman's desire for power. So the Goblin offers Spider-Man a choice: join him and use their combined power for their own gain, or stay a hero. And after Spider-Man refuses, he tries to kill him, just like all the other roadblocks before him. Now, the next scene is one of the most important scenes for all the characters, so we'll be talking about it a lot. After meeting the Goblin, we can see that Norman is having a hard time controlling his goblin urges, and after he figures out that Peter is Spider-Man, he loses control and he has to leave the dinner. Now, since this is the second time Harry has tried to get Norman to meet MJ, he chases after him, and Norman says some pretty sexist things about MJ. And when Harry tries to defend her, Norman just gets angry at him. Defeated, Harry gives up, and MJ confronts him about it. In this moment, Harry is forced to choose between MJ and his father. And because of all the abuse he suffered, he defaults to doing what would make his father happy. He picks Norman over his own girlfriend. This choice sets up Harry's character for the rest of the trilogy. Norman, after learning Peter is Spider-Man, tries to fight the Goblin's desire to kill him, but he gives up quickly. The Goblin decides to attack the people closest to Peter instead of fighting him. Norman becomes consumed by the Goblin after this. Norman appears only 2 more times in the film after this. The first being after Harry learns that MJ loves Peter. He gets mad and he tells this to Norman. Norman decides to give Harry the admiration he so desires to get the information out of him. Norman is only used for his connections to Peter's loved ones. To learn about Peter's love for MJ, Norman exploits all the trauma that Harry has suffered as a result of their abusive relationship. Look at how he's above Harry for a majority of the conversation. This is a visual way of showing us that Norman has all the power in their relationship, and he's using it for his own gain. Harry at this moment becomes entirely committed to getting his father's admiration above all else. Then we come to the final battle. The Goblin has kidnapped MJ and a bunch of kids to try one last time to get Spider-Man to choose the path of the villain. He can either sacrifice MJ and be the hero, or he can sacrifice the kids and be the villain fueled by his own self-gain. Spider-Man, being the hero that he is, outsmarts the Goblin and saves both MJ and the kids. Just like all the others who refused his offer, the Goblin attempts to kill Spider-Man for this. Now, I said that Norman appears 2 more times in the film after giving in to the Goblin. This is the final time. Norman tries to exploit Peter's desire to help people, just as he exploited Harry's desire to receive his father's approval. He even mirrors one of the citizens with this line:
Thank God for you.
God bless you, Spider-Man. Bless you.
He tries to stall Peter long enough with this to get the glider ready to kill him. But as soon as he sees it isn't going to work on Peter and he refuses to help Norman, he calls the glider in. And this is Norman trying to kill Peter here, not the Goblin. Norman is in complete control here. He has sold his soul to the Goblin to get what he wants. And what he wants right now is to be the most powerful person in New York. And that means killing Spider-Man. But in a form of poetic justice, he ends up killing the other most powerful person in New York, himself. And even in his own death, he won't even let Harry see that his father wasn't someone to look up to.
Peter. Don't tell Harry.
Harry catches Spider-Man returning Norman's body to his home, making him believe that Spider-Man was the one who killed Norman. Harry, consumed by his emotional abuse and admiration for his father, swears revenge on Spider-Man. He mirrors Norman and his dark path with this line:
Thank God for you, Peter.
Thank God for you.
Peter knows that his friend is heading down the dark path, but he can't do anything to save him, and Harry walks away, consumed by revenge. Love, Mary Jane Watson. When we first see Mary Jane, we get glimpses at her unhappiness. especially with her boyfriend Flash Thompson and her verbally abusive father. We also see that she hides all of her feelings around her friends and Flash. We don't get our first real glimpse into her true feelings until about 30 minutes into the movie. Peter is taking out the trash and he can hear MJ having a big fight with her parents, and she storms outside. They start talking, and MJ asks Peter questions about what he wants to do after high school. But when the questions get turned back on her, she hesitates. It takes her a while to work up the courage to tell someone about her dreams. We can assume this is because she's mentioned her dream of acting before, but she's been belittled and talked down to, whether by her father or by Flash. And when she finally tells Peter, her face goes from scared to confusion when Peter encourages her. She's shocked to see someone who sees her for who she is and encourages her. She becomes genuinely happy and tries to connect with Peter, but they're interrupted by Flash coming over to show her his new car, and she covers up her feelings with excitement. During the graduation scene, MJ breaks up with Flash, and we learn later that she started dating Harry. MJ talks to Peter in a later scene after getting off her job of waiting tables. She tries to hide this fact from him and claim that she's already acting. It doesn't work, but when Peter finds out, he tells her it's nothing to be ashamed of, because no one makes it big right from the start, and she thanks him. She also tells Peter not to tell Harry that she's waiting tables because he'd think it's low. We can start to see that she's dating another man who doesn't see her for who she is, but she hasn't realized it yet, probably because she's so used to people treating her like she's worthless. She starts to realize this at the World Unity Day festival, when Harry tells MJ that she should have worn the black dress because he wanted to impress Norman and he likes black. She tries to tell him that he should focus on what he thinks of her and not what Norman thinks of her, but he just doesn't get the message, so she blows him off. She's even shown more signs of Harry not truly caring for her when he offers to buy her something to make her feel better instead of actually being there for her after she almost dies during the goblin's attack. She gets to see that Peter still cares for her dream of acting when he comes to see her after her audition. She asks him to go to dinner with her and Harry, but he declines. She starts to get a sense that he has feelings for her, and when she questions him about it, he tries to dodge the questions, but he doesn't hide it very well. At the Thanksgiving dinner scene, it's the first time that MJ is going to meet Norman, and look at the dress that she's wearing. The black dress that Harry wanted her to wear to impress Norman. And look at when she finally meets him. Look at the creepy looks that Norman gives her. She's clearly uncomfortable with this, and when Norman leaves the dinner, he starts yelling at Harry about how MJ just likes him for his money. Her face is full of regret when she realizes that she's trying to impress some creep who just doesn't care about her just because Harry wants her to impress him. And then, her face turns from regret to anger when Harry doesn't even stand up for her, and after he yells at her to keep her mouth shut, she promptly leaves the dinner. Later, Peter and MJ are talking about the aftermath of the dinner in the hospital. MJ tells Peter about how she doesn't love Harry anymore, for obvious reasons, and how she has a crush on Spider-Man. Peter uses this opportunity to create a fake conversation between him and Spider-Man, where Spider-Man asks Peter what he thinks of MJ, and Peter uses this to tell MJ about how much he loves and cares for her. MJ, realizing she's found someone who truly cares for her and who she is, tries to connect with him. However, they're interrupted by Harry entering the room. And in the final scene of the movie, after Norman's funeral, MJ confesses her love for Peter. She tells him that she loves him because he sees her for who she is, and she doesn't make him feel belittled or worthless or scared, and he makes her feel like herself, like she can follow her dreams. But, through no fault of her own, she gets rejected, which leads me to the final theme of this movie. Responsibility, Peter Parker.
But let me assure you, this, like any story worth telling, is all about a girl. That girl. The girl next door. Mary Jane Watson.
The opening monologue establishes one of Peter's main motivations throughout the whole movie, Mary Jane. We also get to meet another one of Peter's main motivations early on in the film, Uncle Ben. These two characters drive every action that Peter takes over the course of this film. So, during a school field trip, Peter gets bitten by the spider. He comes home from school and passes out. He wakes up the next day with all of his powers, and he spends the next day trying to learn his powers. But when he learns that he can shoot webs, he instigates a fight with the school bully, Flash Thompson. But before the fight, we get this line.
I don't want to fight you, Flash.
Showing us that at his heart, Peter isn't a bad kid, and he doesn't want to hurt anyone. However, he gains control of his power and humiliates Flash, and he's thrilled by it. He runs off after getting a concerned look from Mary Jane. He goes to an alleyway to try out his powers. Once he learns all of his powers, he starts having fun. He's jumping across rooftops, swinging across buildings, but he spends so much time doing this that he completely forgets to help Uncle Ben paint the house. He gets home late at night and talks to Mary Jane. He sees her get excited about Flash's new car, so he decides to buy a car. The only way he can get enough money, however, is amateur wrestling. He figures that with his powers, it'll be a cakewalk, but the ad says he needs a costume. His motivation from MJ drives him to create the Spider-Man costume for the wrestling match. He goes to leave for the match when Uncle Ben offers to drive him downtown. Uncle Ben, being worried about Peter, tries to talk to him, to lead him onto a good path. He gives Peter the famous line,
"With great power comes great responsibility."
but Peter is too blinded by his desire to be with MJ, and he pushes Uncle Ben away, just so he can get to the wrestling match. Uncle Ben, clearly saddened by what Peter said, gives up and lets Peter go. The match serves as a good way to see how far Peter has fallen. He went from not wanting to fight Flash to having no qualms with beating up Bonesaw for money. It's like the old saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolute. After the fight, the manager doesn't give him close to the full amount of money and he leaves, but as he's walking out, the manager gets robbed. Even though Peter could have easily stopped the robber, he lets him go to get revenge. We can tell by the smug look on his face that he's very satisfied with himself for this. Peter is starting to parallel Norman's dark path. They are both becoming selfish people who do things purely for their own self-interest. But unlike Norman, Peter gets a wake-up call that brings him back onto the good path. When Peter goes to get picked up by Uncle Ben, he finds that Uncle Ben's been shot. Uncle Ben, despite the things Peter said to him, shows Peter that he loves him in his final moments. Peter's sadness quickly turns to anger when he learns the shooter's location. He suits up and chases his first criminal, except he does this purely out of revenge. Even after his death, he can't remember Uncle Ben's lesson. It's only after he catches the shooter that he realizes the error of his ways. He fights the shooter in an abandoned warehouse, and at the end of the fight, Peter learns that the shooter is the same man who robbed the wrestling manager, the same man he could have stopped had he not been so vengeful. The fight ends with the robber tripping and falling out of a window, and Peter flees the scene and reflects on his actions. After his graduation, Peter thinks about the lesson Uncle Ben tried to teach him. He realizes that he's been bestowed a great power and it's his responsibility to use that power for the good of the people around him, not for his own selfish gain. So he suits up and begins fighting crime. The public reaction to Spider-Man is mostly positive, with people praising him for protecting the people. However, there are some detractors who think that he's just an untrustworthy vigilante, which, granted, he is a vigilante with no permission from any type of authority to fight crime. We're also introduced to two members of the Daily Bugle, a newspaper company. One of them is J. Jonah Jameson, who represents the negative reaction to Spider-Man, calling him a public menace and a criminal. The other is Robbie Robertson, who represents the positive reaction to Spider-Man, with him trying to convince Jonah that Spider-Man's a hero. Along with the negative press, Peter starts to see some other downsides to being a hero, like the fact that he keeps getting fired because he's late because he has to save people. However, he finds a job that works perfectly for him, freelance photography. All he has to do is take pictures of himself saving people as Spider-Man and give them to the Daily Bugle, although he quickly runs into conflict with Jameson when he tries to use the photos to fuel the bad press Spider-Man is getting. Peter's a little discouraged by this, but he needs the money, so he gives Jameson the photos anyway. While he's taking the photos for the Daily Bugle at the World Unity Day festival, the Goblin attacks. He suits up and saves the citizens and defeats the Goblin. At the end of the fight, he has to save MJ from falling off a balcony. When she asks who he is, we get this exchange.
Wait! Who are you?
You know who I am.
I do?
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
This scene demonstrates so much character growth for Peter. At the beginning of the movie, he would have gladly used the opportunity to tell MJ who he is and win her over, but now, he understands how selfish that would be of him to use his powers to steal the girl he loves, especially from his best friend. And in the next scene, we see Peter coming to terms with the fact that it's his own fault that he isn't with MJ, because of his lack of courage to ask her out. Now, after an attempt by Peter to convince Jameson that Spider-Man is a hero, Jameson tells him to leave, not convinced. But as Peter is walking out the door, the Goblin attacks the Daily Bugle, and we get this exchange.
Who's the photographer who takes the pictures of Spider-Man?
I don't know who he is. His stuff comes in the mail.
You're lying!
I swear.
He's the one who can bring me to him.
I don't know who he is.
J. Jonah Jameson, someone who is motivated only by his bottom line and someone who prints libel about a hero, risks his own life to save Peter. This shows Peter that even though some people may hate Spider-Man, they're still all worth saving. During the attack on the Bugle, the Goblin kidnaps Spider-Man and takes him to a rooftop. There, the Goblin tells Peter,
"In spite of everything you've done for them, eventually they will hate you. Why bother?"
Peter isn't swayed by this at first, but after their conversation, the Daily Bugle reports on the attack and claims that Spider-Man is working with the Green Goblin. Due to this, the city calls for Spider-Man's arrest. Immediately, the Goblin's words come true. In the next scene, after Spider-Man saves Mary Jane from some criminals, Mary Jane reassures him and tells him that despite the hatred, Spider-Man is doing the right thing. And after saving a baby from a burning building, a police officer comes to arrest him. However, after they learn there's still some more people trapped inside the building, the police let him go. These two events reassure Peter that he's doing the right thing by being Spider-Man, despite all the negative press. Later, after the Green Goblin learned Peter's identity during the Thanksgiving scene, Aunt May is attacked by the Green Goblin. Peter realizes that the Green Goblin knows who he is. Peter sits by Aunt May's bed and looks at a photo of Uncle Ben, saying,
I'm sorry.
He wasn't careful enough with his identity, and now the people he loves are at stake. He failed to be responsible with his power. He failed Uncle Ben. And later, Peter realizes that since the Goblin knows who he is, he must also know that he loves MJ. And sure enough, when he calls MJ to check up on her, the Goblin answers the phone. During the final battle, the Goblin offers Spider-Man a choice: save MJ and let a bunch of children die, or save the children and let MJ die. The Goblin reflects Uncle Ben's words with this line:
We are who we choose to be.
These are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into.
Peter, not wanting to fail the people of New York or his loved ones, saves both MJ and the children. However, the Goblin tries to kill him while he's doing so. But who comes to the rescue? The people of New York. This scene serves two purposes, the first being the real-life purpose of providing New Yorkers with a sense of unity after the tragedy of 9/11, and the second is to show Peter that despite calling for his arrest, the people of the city still believe in him. First, there are some sailors who bring their barge underneath Spider-Man to help him save the children and MJ. And the second, the people on the bridge throw objects at the Goblin to buy Spider-Man enough time to save the children and MJ. Without both of these groups coming together to support Spider-Man, he definitely would have lost this battle. In the final fight in the abandoned building, Peter gets destroyed by the Goblin, but it's not until the Goblin threatens Mary Jane that Peter gets the necessary strength to win the fight. Not only because of his love for MJ, but because he already failed to protect his loved ones once, and he's not going to fail them or Uncle Ben again. Norman offers for Peter to join him and come down his dark path, even going so far to say that Norman is like Peter's father. Peter, reflecting on the consequences of the last time he went down that path, goes from saying this,
And I know I'm not your father.
Then stop pretending to be.
to saying this.
I have a father. His name was Ben Parker.
Peter, after learning all of this, makes the hardest decision in the film. After Mary Jane, the woman that Peter has wanted to be with for the entire film, confesses her feelings for him, he rejects her. He saw what his lack of responsibility did to the people he loves. Even after committing to a life of responsibility, he saw what his failures did to those close to him. He doesn't want anyone else to be harmed, and that means keeping them as far away from Peter as possible. He can't fail Uncle Ben again. Anyone who's been given a gift, whether it's having superpowers, like Spider-Man, or it's just something normal like being intelligent, being strong, or having influence, or a host of other things, is given power. But whether or not we wanted these powers, we must learn how to use our powers, and how to use them to help other people. Because with great power comes great responsibility.